Hey there. I hope things are going well with the class. Always email me if you have questions or concerns. I wanted to talk just a little bit about Chapter 4. It's hard for me to kind of know where to go through because so many of you are at different stages in the course, but I'm going to just talk a little bit about each one in these updates. I certainly think this is an important chapter. Introduction to Suicide. If you're working in the crisis field in any capacity, you're certainly going to be talking to and helping people who have had suicidal thoughts. Your book talks about suicidal ideation, and I'm glad they brought up that word. When I was training in the field, I remember experiencing and finding out about a lot of vocabulary words that I didn't know what they were. Ideation, well, of course, suicidal ideation is thoughts. And so many times in the field, I would ask clients, probably 1,000 times, do you have suicidal ideation, intent, or plan? And of course, you would say to them exactly, do you have suicidal thoughts? Do you have intent, or do you have a plan? Many people have suicidal thoughts, more than you think. Perhaps you have had them from time to time, where you thought to yourself, oh, I wish I wasn't here. That's a thought. That doesn't mean you'd act on it, but you have had the thought pass your mind, perhaps. Others have ideation, which is the thought, intent, which is very important to ask about suicidal intent. As it states on your slide, 72% with a plan make an attempt. So 34% make a plan. So rates have remained stable in the past 40 years. So, and somebody may have intent to do something, but if they already have a plan or not, that changes everything. Let's say they really are depressed and are thinking about harming themselves, but they, don't have the means to go buy a gun, or they live with their mother, or there's all these different protective factors, or perhaps they don't believe in suicide, another protective factor. These are all things that can need to be taken into consideration when you're assessing suicidal ideation, intent, or plan. I love that this chapter talks about symptoms and clues, because you may ask somebody, do you have suicidal ideation, intent, or plan? And they say, well, no, of course not. But then they say that, well, they've given away all their possessions. Why did you give your nephew the car? Oh, I thought he might need it. Why did you give your dog to a neighbor? Oh, she loves my dog. There's all sorts of elaborate things that people will do. You will see people in their 20s writing a will. You will see people who love their job and quitting their job. People may break up with a significant other. Another thing that you will see in the field a lot is when they are preoccupied with death. Someone who used to like, really light and lively music suddenly likes music that's mostly about death or dying, or is just a change. Does that mean people who like death metal all want to commit suicide? Absolutely not. I worked once with a grandmother who liked death metal. She wasn't suicidal at all. It's what she liked. She was just unique. So you can't go by that. But these are clues to try to evaluate and see if somebody might be suicidal. If someone starts using a drug or starts using a drug more heavily, it's possible that this should be investigated. It could mean that the person is suicidal. And being isolated is a big one also. Displaying psychotic behavior, recent death in the family of a friend or relative, withdrawing from unusual activities, all of those things are important to find out about. And you'll find out about that on the suicide assessment. Each place that you work for will have a different one, so I can't tell you exactly what's going to be on it, but you will be asking a lot of intensive questions in a quick manner, because obviously if you think somebody might be suicidal, you don't have a lot of time. You may be under high stress situations also. I know when I would go to someone's home or to the jail or to Aspirus or to St. Clair's at the hospitals, I had to have my questions answered quite quickly, and that's not an easy thing to ask, nor you need to be respectful, because nor is it an easy thing to answer. You're trying to determine risk. How at risk is this person? I think the average person would be very shocked at how many people have suicidal thoughts in their community, but are considered low risk. They might have a plan but no means. As I stated before, they live with their mother, or they've had chronic thoughts of suicide but no real intent or plan, or they don't have access to the plan they would choose. All their medications are locked up at any given time, or they're watched by workers at a group home at all times. So there are people that go to the crisis center with suicidal thoughts, that leave with suicidal thoughts, that are not put inpatient. There are also people with a middle risk that have the means but something that can stop them also. They talk about a suicide contract, that's in your book. Increased contact, family may watch them, refer to medication evaluation, possible voluntary hospitalization when very depressed. Bigger communities such as Wausau have more than an inpatient unit. They usually have some sort of housing, temporary housing, that somebody could be at voluntarily if they're feeling suicidal but have no intention of harming themselves. Bigger cities have more housing available, and smaller communities have very little available. So really the type of work you do and what you're able to offer people really depends on where the community you're working in and what's available. All right, let's talk about high risk. So you're working in a crisis center, someone calls up and states that they're going to take pills, or they have already. They say that nothing can stop them. Obviously you're going to intervene. Either the police will bring them in or their family will bring them in, and they'll be evaluated. What we do in Marathon County, as they do in most counties, is they would be put on the inpatient unit. What's interesting is that different communities do things differently. In most of the counties in the state of Wisconsin, the person needs to be seen and evaluated by a psychiatrist within 72 hours. Milwaukee County's different. They have to be evaluated within 24 hours because of a lot of deaths at the Milwaukee County Hospital. I'm going to show you an article that you might find interesting. I love the Milwaukee Journal watchdog reports. We certainly have a lot of problems within central Wisconsin with having not enough bed space for people that may be suicidal or who are in crisis. But Milwaukee County, of all of the places in the United States, has the most emergency detentions, has the most deaths in their hospital units, mental health hospital units. And it says here that in every other county, doctors have 72 hours to decide if patients are dangerous enough to warrant being held against their will. But of course, Milwaukee County's special. They've had so many problems and so many lawsuits and deaths that they get an average of 27 patients a day. I think the most I ever had in Marathon County was 11, and that was very high. We ran 4, 5, 6, which is more than some of the smaller counties, such as St. Mary's and Rhinelander, where you'd be having that a week. But in Milwaukee County, 27 per day. Imagine the workload for those social workers and psychiatrists trying to do a really good job, but yet they're interviewing and evaluating 27 people within a 24-hour period. There's a good watchdog series that you should look up if you're interested. There's a really good 2013 article also about abuses at the county and also how they could turn it around. So I thought you might be interested and check it out. This is another article that I think is really good. It's about Milwaukee County mental health system traps patients in cycle of emergency care. And you think, but I'm not going to work in Milwaukee. Well, it's important to know about this because it also happens to a lesser degree at local counties. It's a shortage of community treatment means police aren't called to handle all those in crisis while doctors face legal hurdles to provide adequate care. It certainly is a big problem in central Wisconsin that there isn't enough housing once somebody comes out of the crisis center or after the emergency detention. Once somebody is found, if there is enough evidence to find that the person needs to be under commitment, technically the county is supposed to provide for them. However, that's not how it occurs much of the time, simply because of budget cuts and because of lack of housing shortages. That's certainly what Milwaukee County is experiencing. The same article talking about all the problems that Milwaukee has talks about the Madison model. They pushed for deinstitutionalization, which means the mentally ill went out of the mental health institutes into the communities, But then they noticed that 60% of their patients were returning within 14 months. And Madison has been very assertive about setting up community programs versus other places, such as Milwaukee. And they've kind of become the treatment model used at progressive communities around the world. So they really have set up more, and if you're interested in what's really working, you may want to Google the Madison model or Madison assertive community treatment, because they really have a lot more social workers, a lot more counselors, a lot of in-home staff for people who have a mental illness who may be prone to suicide than any place else that I've seen. So within 5 years of having counselors and social workers and programs in the community, readmission rates fell from 60% to 6%, and they spent more time employed and living independently. This Madison model was adopted in Columbus, Ohio, and Chicago, and there are hundreds of programs around the United States. We have something similar to that in Wausau, but certainly because of budget cuts, that program is smaller than it used to be. They basically said it's the gold standard of mental health care. Even in Belgium, it now follows Madison's model, but Milwaukee, one doctor came to take a look about 15 years ago, but didn't seem very interested. Isn't that amazing how different mental health care systems can be within the same state? And when I say interesting, I mean sad, because I really think that everyone deserves that sort of treatment and support. Everyone deserves to have supports once they come through a crisis. And those kind of supports mean the difference between going into crisis again or really being able to stay and have a healthy, happy life. One last thing I wanted to talk about was risk factors for violence against others. I certainly have worked with people who are homicidal and genuinely homicidal, and certainly when you have to check that box for the first time, you're going to have a pit in your stomach. Mind you, we have to talk about this just like suicidal. You will ask, do you have homicidal ideation or thoughts, intent, or plan? And there are plenty of people who have been harmed by others that may really think about harming them back. So they may say, yes, I want to kill them. And you say, well, do you have intent or plan? Well, no. A lot of the time they'll say they don't have a plan, they've just been harmed or hurt themselves. But if they say, do you have intent? Oh yes, when I get out of jail or when I get out of this hospital, I'm going to go get my gun and I'm going to shoot them. And then you have to assess, are they serious about it? Have they been thinking about this a long time? And that's when you have to do some serious assessment. And the person will be staying for a time on the inpatient unit to make sure they're safe. There are people that are both suicidal and homicidal at the same time. A lot of victims of trauma may present, not a lot, but some victims of trauma may present that way. They've been through so much and they've been harmed to such a degree that they really need help. It is much more rare to work with someone that is homicidal. You will work with many more people who are suicidal in the field. I like that they mentioned the risk factors. Having a history of violence, if they were abused as a young child, if they were in abusive relationships, if they have poor impulse control, there may be delusions or hallucinations, fear of being controlled, perception of rejection, being under the influence of substances. Many people are when they say that they want to harm someone else. But not all, that's for sure. Past history of antisocial personality disorder and traumatic head injury. And traumatic head injury is something we ask about often in the field, because if there's a certain change where they started to have thoughts of harming others and they never did, it's amazing how much that a portion of the time that the person will have had a car accident or have had some medical condition. I've had some really horrified people that I've interviewed have suicidal or homicidal thoughts after a car accident when they've never had those thoughts before. So it's just things to take into consideration. Look through your textbook. Look through, there's great videos on assessing suicidal and homicidal people on YouTube. You may consider interning at a crisis center. You may also consider doing a sit-in at a 911 center. In Marathon County, they allow that. I had no idea. Anyway, I hope you have some things to think about. Take care.